there in the state of Washington. Washington State Cougars watched him at the Senior Bowl as well, where he really helped himself, as did his younger brother Desmond Trufant. And so those are definitely some of the players who have jumped out at me. But it's funny because talking about state of Washington kind of guys, I'll tell you the best cornerback workout pro day I've ever gone to was Marcus Peters. And so I mentioned Marcus Peters before, how he's getting beat for the Rams. I still really think that he's a talented football player. He's going to be just fine. It seems to me like he is kind of is playing through some injuries for the Rams. Was there any other players that kind of jumped out at you over the last few years as just because I mentioned like the Lattimore, Denzel Ward, and then actually the other one that I was going to mention is Tre'Davious White. Him at LSU. We talked about LSU before and just the way they churn out corners. But a guy who I watched in college and didn't know that he had the physicality I was looking for, was surprised that Buffalo took him because I knew that they were going to ask him to be a little bit more physical. But you're seeing his quickness. I mean, he's been one of the better corners in all of the league over his first couple of seasons in the NFL. So to me, what it comes down to is, and this is ultimately where my question is going to kind of go to, is that when I look at corners now, I used to look at height was going to be my number one thing. I want a guy who was going to be 6 foot. I want broad shoulders. I want long arms. Now I think, of course you have to have a certain element of speed. But now, for me, my number one thing is feet, and maybe it always should have been, but it definitely is now, is the footwork, and are these guys quick enough with their feet? Number two is do they have that mindset? Can they forget about the play that just happened? If they gave up a reception, as you mentioned, even the great Kent McCloughan, even the great Deion Sanders gave up their receptions, but did they have the poise to battle the next play? And then ball skills. I definitely think the ball skills are a big part of that. And what I did not mention there is tackling, which breaks my heart because that's the way I think that football should be played. But again, today's NFL, I don't know that the tackling, I don't know that size is quite as important as it once was, just because the game is so quick now. And if you have the cover skills, then they're just not going to throw the ball, so you don't have to necessarily tackle quite as much as you used to.
Yeah, the thing is, if I'm grading a corner,
yeah.
Good, bad, indifferent, whatever the corner is, I look for feet. I look for ability to press. Like you said, size is very important to me, but I understand that there's not a lot of big corners out there. Hips, being able to drop their hips and change directions, huge.
Yeah.
But the main thing, and not the main thing, because speed's very important, the quickness is very important, the feet are very important. Ball skills, like you said, ball skills are huge. It changes games, and that's one thing I learned from Ted Thompson, because we did a lot of work a couple years when I was in Seattle with him for safeties.
Okay.
And the key thing was, Scott, we need guys that can catch the ball. He might have 18 passes defended and have 2 picks. Well, what's that telling you? It means he can't catch the ball. And I understand defense. Everybody makes the remark that that's why they're on defense, because they can't catch. Nah, those change games, and that's what's so cool about like a Richard Sherman.
Yeah,
his ball skills were excellent. And you can see the amount of picks he's had. Like Denzel Ward, we talked about already. Look, he's got 4 picks or 5 picks already. That changes games. That's huge, because nowadays they're going to throw the ball at you, no matter what. They're going to throw the ball at you. And if you get your hands on it, if you knock it down, good play. You pick it, change a field possession. That's a great play. And that's where everybody underestimates the ball skills for a DB. Say if you're a corner, but it's so important, so important.
No, it really is. And you mentioned Sherman, and of course, again, in the Seattle area, watched him so much, and it's like I said, it kind of makes me. I'm embarrassed to say, I can't believe I'm saying it when I say I don't think that tackling is quite as important at the corner position, because watching Sherman, I would agree with you. I think that his ball skills, as a former wide receiver at Stanford, and And all his success that he had, at Stanford as well as, in the NFL since. But he was also he's one of the more remarkable tacklers I've ever seen at the corner position. I mean, he almost plays like a safety. I mean, his length, I mean, he would just kind of lasso ball carriers, look like they were kind of out of his range, and he's physical when he needs to be. He definitely can lower his shoulder, and that was to me one of the things that was very underrated, at least while he was at Seattle. I didn't think that nationally speaking, people would give him enough credit for how good of a tackler, how good of a run enforcer he was. I think that he was critical in that way, and that's been kind of one of the fascinating things. Like with Pete Carroll, I've watched that his corners tackle, and so it's very different than some of the other teams I see throughout the league who are focusing more on those smaller, quicker corners that maybe don't tackle. Are you seeing some of the things? I mean, not necessarily the Seahawks or any other club, but are you seeing the kind of that transition throughout the league that some guys are going with the bigger corners and some guys are focusing more on the smaller corners, and which do you generally prefer?
Well, of course, with me, I like size, I like toughness, I like aggressiveness.
Sorry, I'm not sure about that.
Alexa off. Sorry. To each your own. It all depends on your scheme.
Yeah.
But you're right, because there's some corners that are, like you said, cover guys. That mean they're really talented from the standpoint of covering, which is your main priority as a corner.
Mm-hmm.
But also, you're going to be put in situations in every game where you have to tackle. It could be 3rd and 5. It could be 4th and 2, and you have to tackle. A lot of DB's mindset is like, I don't want to say prima donna, but just, I'm a cover corner. That's what I do. I cover the receiver. We got other guys to tackle people.
Yeah.
But you're going to be put in a situation every game, no matter what, that you have to tackle. And, the good ones do it. Like in Richard Sherman, everybody thought, because he talked so much and thought he was a prima donna. He wasn't.
Yeah.
He wasn't. He was definitely physical. If you go back and watch, again, Deion Sanders, when he had to tackle, he tackled. And it's when you get a really good one, which are not very often, they can cover, but they're also physical, and they're not afraid to have contact.
I think that's a good way of putting it, is that, they kind of are physical when they need to be. They're not the kind of guys necessarily, because I don't remember seeing a lot of times where Deion Sanders was one of those guys who would jump on the pile necessarily.
Sure. No, you're right.
But at the same time, you're right. I don't know of very many times that I can think of where Deion came up and tried to tackle somebody and missed, and they ran away for a touchdown or whatever. I mean, hell, it's Deion Sanders. He probably would have caught him from behind anyways. But at the same time, it's one of those things where you see guys that they're pros and they're going to make the tackle when they have to, and then other guys who just kind of play with a different mindset. Now, I'll give you an example. So we mentioned before, like Greedy Williams, Byron Murphy. Both of these guys are in that 185 to 190 pound range. They're both in that 6 foot. Greedy's listed at 6'2". So kind of curious to see what he actually measures in at. But you can definitely see the length, and they're slimmer guys. And then you have a guy named like Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, who's at Florida, and he's played some nickel, he's played some safety, but he looks more like a typical Seattle or Green Bay corner. He's just a much broader guy, much thicker built. Looks like he's 210 pounds, and those extra 20 pounds, you definitely can see it as a hitter. Now, sometimes he drops his head and he misses tackles, but he is incredibly physical. And so that would be the last thing I kind of mentioned on this cornerback conversation we're having today is, are you seeing more of the guys who, it used to be that if you're a smaller corner, then they'll just move you inside to nickel. That was the stereotype people would say. And of course that wouldn't work, because if you're playing nickel corner, a lot of times you're going to be that much closer to the big boys, And so you got to be a pretty remarkably tough guy to slide in there and play nickel corner. But are you seeing more guys who can make that transition from safety to corner, or from corner to safety, the opposite, kind of like what we're seeing here with Seattle with that Trey Flowers I mentioned, possibly in Green Bay with the trade of Clinton Dix. They're talking about moving some of the other corners to that safety position, or maybe, as I mentioned, with the Johnson Gardner-Johnson from Florida, who has been asked to make that transition. Is that something that you look for, that ability to play multiple positions, or when you're looking at corners, you have those certain check marks that you're looking for?
Well, the thing about it is, anytime you evaluate a corner, / safety, whatever, you're trying to identify what's their best position. Yeah. If we're going to draft this guy, we're going to sign this guy, where is he best line up at? I think it's much easier to go from corner to safety than safety to corner, just because of the athleticism that it takes to play corner. If you got a good football player and you worry a little bit about his foot quickness or his top end speed, all that stuff, is he? So you recognize that he's a really good football player.
Yeah.
So then you understand, is he going to be able to survive on an island? Or is he better suited to be playing free or strong because he has the natural ability to play the game? You can see it on tape.
Yeah.
But it's the best thing for the team is to play in safety. It's really hard. I never forget, we drafted Darren Sharper, out of William Mary.
Yep.
As a corner, because Ron Wolf, because he's a big kid that could really run, we're going to try it. And it lasted like 2 weeks. He's like, no, he's a safety. He's a safety through and through, which was fine. That's one of the 11. That's one of the 11, and that's important to put them in a situation to be successful. That's why you have coaches, and that's why you identify certain talents that they have physically and football-wise, and you want them on the field, But I personally think it's really tough to go from safety to corner. I think it's much easier to go from corner to safety.
Well, it's a good point. I'm happy you mentioned that with Sharper. I mean, that's one of the things I saw. Again, I went to the Seahawks-Chargers game 2 days ago, and I just been so impressed by Desmond King. For the Chargers, who is now their safety, was among the NFL's leader in interceptions a year ago, and of course played corner at Iowa. And the big knock on him was that he didn't have that elite straight line speed, was more in that mid 4.5 range, but physical. We talked about the ball skills. I mean, this is a former Thorpe Award winner at Iowa, because of all the interceptions that he had. And so to me, that kind of goes exactly to your point, that there are those players who, maybe were asked to play corner in college, making that transition. And so do you remember it was a terrific story you just mentioned about Ron Wolf and Darren Sharper. Do you remember what was it about Sharper that made you guys think, okay, this is a safety and that he's not going to be corner? Is it just he couldn't cover guys one-on-one quite as well, or is it more because you just liked his vision or his physicality, or what was it that in your mind, or maybe in Ron Wolf's mind, was why you thought that he's going to be a safety through and through?
Well, Ron's the one to want to make him a corner because he touches so well.
Gotcha.
He was tall, he was long, and he could really run. And, Ron always took chances on those type of guys. He took receivers, Bucky Brooks, and tried to make him a DB type things.
Yeah.
And, and he just he was too long-legged and too stiff-hipped to play corner.
Gotcha.
Now, if you want him to play press every snap, you get your hands on, and he could do that. But they realize he's more important to be in the middle of the field, being able to see, because he can go sideline to sideline. And he had really good instincts. He was really, really intelligent. And that was his best spot, and he had a really good career. Really good career.
No, he did, and that's one of the things that was exciting about it. It's just I'm I'm trying to look at some of these corners. I mentioned Chauncey again at Florida as a guy who I struggle